Entering the fourth year of a devastating civil war, the Confederate and Union armies made preparations to elevate the killing of fellow Americans far beyond anyone's expectations. Deep sorrow gripped a stunned nation, already grieving the passing of too many of her finest young men. In addition to battlefield casualties, a flood of prisoners presented both armies with the challenging problem of where to put them. The ill-prepared North and South failed to recognize the logistics involved in housing the massive number of prisoners. As a result, captured soldiers languished in congested and unsanitary prisons without adequate resources to sustain them. For one captured Southern soldier, the foul conditions in northern prisons didn't meet his expectations of how a guest from the South should be treated. Sergeant Barry Benson concluded the Yankee hospitality lacked the home cooking and comfortable accommodation so prevalent down home in Dixie. So the unhappy sergeant decided it was time to go home, a decision not favored by the prison hierarchy. All thoughts fixated on breaking out. A singular focus that served him well. The elusive Confederate escaped from a Yankee prison not once, but twice. Barry Benson was born in Hamburg, South Carolina, but later moved to Augusta, Georgia. Along with his brother, Blackwood, Barry enlisted in the 1st South Carolina Volunteers at the first sign of hostilities. Benson holds the distinction of pulling the lanyard on one of the cannons that sent a 20-pound missile crashing into the ramparts of Fort Sumter in April of 1861. Bold feats and exceptional bravery quickly earned Benson a promotion to sergeant. Being adventurous, the recently designated scout's daring exploits finally landed him in the hands of the enemy. In early May of 1864, while on a scouting mission for General Lee's army, Union forces captured the gray-clad Carolinian and shipped him to the Point Lookout military prison in Maryland. The prison featured a 30-acre stockade fronted on one side by the Chesapeake Bay. From the moment he stepped inside the stockade, Benson was plotting escape. Less than 48 hours later, a glaring opportunity soon beckoned. With daylight fading fast, the enterprising Barry noticed a gate left open by an irresponsible guard. The undetected prisoner slipped through the gate and quietly disappeared into the bay. Benson later recalled the escape.
Backing slowly, I went into deeper water and began up the bay. I looked behind me. Far away lay the white walls of the prison. How happy I was, for I was free to fight again under the stars and bars.
A rush of adrenaline, aided by the vigor of youth, propelled the wayward sergeant for a lengthy swim up the bay for several miles until well above the prison. Convinced that the stockade was well south, the dripping, wet, and exhausted rebel waded ashore. All signs indicated the getaway was clean. Uncertain if the locals were friendly, the escapee quickly scrambled off the beach and disappeared into the brush. After trekking across the Maryland Peninsula to just below Washington, the welcoming sounds of the rushing Potomac River announced the Confederate camps must be near. An encouraged Benson stood on the banks of the Potomac, gazing across the river at Virginia. Only a brisk swim separated him from Dixieland. A reunion with Lee's army seemed imminent. Endless good fortune seemed to envelop Benson. Eager to push forward, he splashed into the river. But once on the other side, the good luck that followed soon departed. Near George Washington's estate at Mount Vernon, still soaked with the Potomac River, and so close to the Confederate lines, a Union cavalry patrol scooped up the fugitive. The recaptured prisoner enjoyed a personal escort to the nation's capital. This time, a forced residency in the old Capitol prison in Washington served as a temporary home. The prison, a former meeting hall for lawmakers, was, by all accounts, the largest and the dirtiest building in Washington City. Opening a new camp up north alleviated the crowding in the old Capitol building. Benson and a group of other prisoners boarded a train in July bound for the notorious Elmira Prison in New York State. Arriving at the prison on July 24, 1864, guards ushered the captives inside the walls of the Elmira Military Prison. Like all previous accommodations in the North, Berry found Elmira less than pleasing. Concocting a new plan for another escape didn't take long. During his brief stay at Elmira, Benson and 10 of his comrades busied themselves digging a 65-foot tunnel stretching from inside their tent to just outside the west wall of the prison. For weeks, the conspirators took turns burrowing horizontally below the Earth's surface. Few knew about the excavation. Success demanded secrecy. Come October, the tunnel was finished. After a mere 10 weeks at Elmira, Benson readied for departure. On a cloudy night providing excellent cover, the restless Confederates decided it was time to part ways with their slumbering captors. On October 6th, Barry Benson and his fellow collaborators slipped into a hole in the ground and crawled on their bellies through the tunnel in the only successful escape by tunnel in the prison's history. After slithering through a dark and narrow passageway, the scheming Benson emerged outside the prison a free man. Benson's diary relates his delight.
I ran until exhausted, then stopped and looked back. Is it any wonder that I should give vent to my joy by jumping up and cracking my heels together, throwing my hat in the air? It was all I could do to keep from shouting, "The Bonnie Blue Flag!" at the top of my voice.
Once clear of the prison, the others made plans to travel in pairs. Benson would go it alone. The nearest Confederate army was still 300 miles away. Undaunted, the escaped Southerner lit out on foot for all points south and vanished into the woods. The wily Confederate was loose again, deep in Yankee territory. Armed with only a pocket knife, a few matches, and a working compass, a trying tramp through the North was just beginning. The march started in the mountains of New York with an early October snowfall blanketing the region. A little snow hampered the hike a bit, but hardly dampened the will of a steadfast rebel bound for Southern soil. All along the way, the resourceful Benson stuffed his pockets with corn, fresh apples, and turnips unknowingly donated by farmers from the fertile farms in the North. Raiding chicken coops along the way, the devious Southern fox expanded his menu with a few savory chickens cooked over an open campfire. Clean clothes left out to dry by sleeping farmhands lent a much-desired change of wardrobe. With little trouble, the errant hiker fulfilled his wants and needs. Crossing over the northern border of Pennsylvania, Benson sought out the southerly flowing Susquehanna River for an easy means of transport. A quick search along the banks of the swift-moving river offered a selection of several unoccupied boats. With comfortable transportation secured, much to the delight of 2 aching feet, Benson shoved off and directed the stolen boat for an effortless float down the river that required little exertion. Barry fondly remembered Pennsylvania.
I didn't do much rowing, but shipped my oars and lay drifting down, eating chestnuts. The night was of unspeakable beauty, and I believe no man in all of Pennsylvania enjoyed it as much as I did.
Only the distant sounds of treacherous rapids ended his nautical adventure and brought the leisurely cruise to a halt. Always following his compass, any path tracking south brought home a little closer. To further ease the journey, a search for rail lines ensued. Hopping a southbound train meant less walking. Traversing Pennsylvania's length seemed long and endless, even for a relaxed stowaway hitching a ride on a moving rail car. But once in Maryland, Benson wasted no time in searching out the Potomac River. With worn-out shoes and bone-tired, Barry Benson stood on the shores of the Potomac River for a second time. Less than half a mile swim stood between him and Old Virginia. Waiting for the cover of darkness increased the odds for a safe crossing. Once night fell, he was ready. To deal with the frigid waters of the river on a raw October night, the shrewd Confederate scavenged a 6-foot plank for an ingenious arrangement. On one end of the board he bundled his clothes and tied them down. Once in the river, with his weight placed on the opposite end of the lashed-down garments, the clothes raised high and dry out of the river. The design performed brilliantly. Plunging into the chilly Potomac for a second swim, the clever Benson commenced paddling under the night sky for the distant Virginia shoreline. Coming ashore shivering and nearly frozen, starting a roaring fire for keeping hypothermia at bay took precedence over all else. A set of matches tied on the top of his head with a string around his chin stayed dry enough to supply the much-needed warmth. Few obstacles hindered the hike of a homesick Confederate. Although a tad safer in Virginia, prior experience taught that bands of Union cavalry roaming the area still threatened his newfound liberty. More thought was given for a strategy once in Virginia. Intent on evading capture this time, success dictated traveling on footpaths concealed in the woods while avoiding the main roads. Back in more familiar surroundings, a Virginia farmer granted Berry permission to sleep in his barn for the night. To his surprise, Benson found the barn filled with Southern partisan Rangers in hiding preparing for a morning raid. Finally convinced the stranger wasn't a spy, the rebel soldiers introduced their leader. An excited Benson shook hands with the Gray Ghost, Colonel John Singleton Mosby. He then sought Mosby's consent to ride with them in the raid. Only a shortage of horses kept the spirited Southerner from marauding with Mosby's legendary cavalry battalion. After mapping out the location of all the Union troops, the Confederate chieftain sent him on his way. Benson's strategy and rash of good luck held out. On October 27th, 3 weeks after trudging over mountains and through dense woodlands, an immense joy overcame the exhausted traveler. While wandering the woods of Virginia, a picket in the woods shouted, "Halt!" The gray-clad soldier was a Johnny Reb of General Bradley's division. After 5 months' captivity, the unrelenting Southerner was home among friends at last. It was 21 days since Berry Benson crawled through a dark and suffocating tunnel to freedom. A sensational excursion in the North was over. Back in the camp of the 1st South Carolina, a warm dose of Southern affection felt especially pleasing after the heartless attitude displayed by his Northern captors. In camp, Berry was given up for dead. But when a surprised Blackwood Benson saw his brother strolling into camp, he leaped to his feet, sprinted towards his long-lost brother, and tackled him in a fit of joy. Friends gathered around to hear how the homecoming hero twice outwitted his Northern captors in an amazing adventure that crossed 3 states. Berry Benson served the rest of the war with Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia right up to the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. The stubborn sergeant refused to surrender. Berry and his brother Blackwood slipped through the picket lines at Appomattox and into the woods. The war-weary brothers went home. Benson never did surrender his musket. Realizing his own good fortune, Benson often thought of the many Confederate soldiers whose only escape from the harsh prison camp in Elmira came in a wooden box atop a wagon headed for the graveyard. Nearly 3,000 Southern soldiers remain to this day buried far from home in Woodlawn Cemetery in New York State. After the war, the Ladies Memorial Association commissioned a huge monument in Augusta, Georgia, to honor all the Confederate soldiers of Richmond County. All agreed the likeness of their Southern hero, Berry Benson, would grace the top of the monument. Perched high atop an impressive 76-foot monument, the marble sergeant forever gazes out lovingly at his beloved Confederacy. Up until his death in 1923, the celebrated Benson came to be known to locals in Augusta as the Man on the Monument.